Hello, my name is Maha Azazi. I graduated with my master's degree in TESOL and Applied Linguistics from the University of Finley last December. And today I'm going to present to you my thesis research on the topic of the implications of international students' cultural dimensions on a acculturative stress level. Just to give you a little background about me that got me interested in this topic and researching in my research. I came from Syria. I am an American citizen, but I grew up in Syria. I completed my high school in Syria, and my goal was always to come back to the US and finish my higher education. For me, getting ready to move to live in the US and enroll in college meant to be able to communicate fluently in English. So I listened to American songs, I played basketball. In Syria, I watched every single American movie and TV show. And I thought that I was ready. Unfortunately, my expectations when I moved back here in college did not match my reality. There was something that I couldn't really get a lot of help sometimes, and something felt like not right, and like seeking help from other people and just having people around me all the time, which was different than Syria. And that what got me interested in researching this topic for my thesis. So I looked at literature handling or talking about or studying international students in the USA. And in most literature, international students face challenges when living in the United States. And there was 4 common obstacles that impact their ability to adapt to their new host environment. These obstacles are culture shock, homesickness, stress and anxiety, and language barriers. I did not have the language barriers, but this is in general was handling the surface structure of cultural differences. So that led to the statement of problem that I found in my study, which is although literature highlighted the challenges that international students experience, few studies investigate the factors behind existence of these challenges. So I tried to look at the deeper structure of the cultural differences between the US communities or societies and international students that made the challenges greater in some students than others. My research question in that was, what is the relationship between different acculturative stress measurements and Hofstede's 1980 cultural dimension? So in my literature review, I looked at acculturative acculturation definitions, strategies in stress. I also looked at Hofstede's cultural dimensions, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and acculturative processes. Now, the definition of acculturation is the process of adapting and adjusting to a different culture. Acculturative stress is the stress that results from the challenges of change in culture once individuals move to societies different than their dominant societies. Hofstede's cultural dimensions was a study that was made in 1980. And he categorized countries and societies around the world in 4 basic or main categories in like cultural dimensions according to country. So power distance, individualism, masculinity, and uncertainty avoidance. And he gave each country a score. And the higher the score was, the bigger the dimension is on it. So he classified the high and low scores for countries in every dimension. Now, just to talk a little bit more about what is power distance, what is individualism, which I focused in specific in my study. Power distance is how different societies accept, follow, and accept or expect authority and distribution of power. So here, individuals are accepting that their leader, whatever the leader is, the title of the leader, king, a president, a boss, they are accepting that they're unequal and that the leader has the complete authority. Well, some societies look at the leader as equal to them, equal to everybody else in the society. It's just they chose that leader to help them out, but it's completely equal. He doesn't have complete authority over them. So this is how some societies look differently at power. For individualism and collectivism, it's basically I versus we. Some societies live in like groups. The benefit of the groups or the interest of the groups go over the interest of the individual, where some societies look at it differently. The individual is the base, and then the group comes. So for power distance and individualism, Hofstede gave Malaysia as the highest in the world, where they have a complete acceptance to the authority of the king or throughout the community or the society. They're more obedience and they accept the inequality, the power distribution. Australia was ranked the lowest with 11. For individualism, the US was the highest, 91. And that tells that the US society or people or individuals in the US are highly individualistic, while Guatemala was the lowest, and that means it's more that like a collectivist society. For my method, I use survey research. I distributed the survey in snowball sampling using SurveyMonkey. My survey design was adapted from 2 previous studies of international students population, the acculturative stress scale for international students, as well as SAFE, social, attitudinal, familial, and environmental acculturative stress scale for children. So I picked my questions based from these 2 surveys to make my survey design. Survey question design, I had 31 survey, 5 background questions asking every individual in specific also where are they from, because country is a key factor here in my study. 6 perceived hate items, 3 perceived fear items, 4 cultural shock stress items, 5 sense of community belonging items, and 8 perceived biased items. So it was, there's no wrong, right answers here. It's just based on how the individual, the international students who took this survey felt they answered the questions based on that. I used Excel and Minitab to interpret scores, find averages, and correlations between the survey responses and the countries of origin to compare with the cultural dimension scores. My participants, I had 46 participants, international students representing 23 countries. Most of the students came from Saudi Arabia, followed by the US and the Middle East. The score ranging was between 26 and 130 points. The higher score indicated a greater acculturative stress. So based on the answers the students provided, their acculturative stress was reflected in that score. Since I had most of the countries represented only by 1 or 2 students, my acculturative stress levels by country of origin was not that effective, so I grouped the countries by geographical regions. And according to this graph, you can see that Africa scored the highest, so the students had the highest acculturative stress levels, followed by East Asia with the 93 scores out of 130, and the Middle East with a 76.6. Well, if you look here, European countries or students from European countries had fairly low South American and North American. Findings. My research or from the survey, I found that students living in the US and coming from countries with high power distance display a high acculturative stress levels, while students living in the US or international students who came from individualistic societies displayed a low acculturative stress level. I also found that there is a strong correlation between perceiving hate non-verbally and feeling treated differently in social situations. Also, a strong correlation between feeling denied opportunities and treated differently in social situations. So participants who felt perceiving hate non-verbally from their community also reported feeling treated socially in a negative way by their host environment. That means despite participants' English competency, they were able to read non-verbal communication. That also means that there is a cultural difference between different countries or different geographical regions where individuals communicate non-verbally. So that might be a misunderstanding too, or miscultural communication as well. Just to restate my research question, what is the relationship between different acculturative stress measurements and international students and the Hofstede cultural dimensions, 1980? My first conclusion is that cultural dimensions affect positively or negatively the way in which international students react and adapt to their host society. Students come from the United States, students coming to the United States, they bring their cultural background with them. Their interaction with the new society are affected by these cultural dimensions. students coming from a high or low power distance countries will interact with new communities based on their high or low cultural dimension. And students coming from high or low individualistic societies will interact with their new community based on the trait of high and low individualistic societies. Realization of these differences cannot be done unless there is a potential work to raise awareness, pointing out these differences to both populations or communities, the international students based on their background countries or background cultural dimensions, and the host society as well. So my recommendation was in my study is to develop programs that promote cultural training and awareness of acculturative stress in international students. A lot of international students have that acculturative stress. It might be intense in some students and noticeable, where it can affect their studies. It can affect their psychological wellness or well-being. Some students, it's not that intense, and some students might not have it at all. So the awareness of like raising the awareness by looking at the international students' cultural dimensions can give and looking at having the students, the international students, looking at the cultural dimensions or the differences of the cultural dimensions of their host society can help a lot in the whole process. I was fortunate enough to participate or create my own program in exploring culture when I worked as a graduate assistant or a graduate student with the Beaufort Center, where I had 10 different students from different backgrounds get together. The program was based on Hofstede's cultural dimensions, where we had real life scenarios. Students interacted based on these scenarios and looked at these differences in how every individual was reacting to these scenarios. And this is a picture of the field trip that we had to do at the end of the program. We went to Detroit. And some of the feedback that I've received from these students, that it was an eye-opener of looking at the deep level of the cultural differences or dimensions. That was my thesis study. Thank you so much for listening. Have a nice day. Thanks.